Hi guys, welcome to Eagles Unfiltered, where we're going to talk about the round two matchup between the West Coast Eagles and North Melbourne at Optus Stadium on Sunday. Last year, of course, this matchup occurred at Hands Oval down in Bunbury in very blustery conditions. And in a one-win season, it was a game that really went begging for us. We actually controlled the flow of the game. I was looking over the stats about it last night, and it probably made me even more angry than I was watching the game itself. So I think we had 5 more scoring shots. We had nearly 20 more inside 50s. We pretty much dominated every single stat except for goals. And there was about an 8-minute patch there in the fourth quarter off the top of my head where North Melbourne just got a run on and then they took the game away from us, which is a real shame because obviously we only won one game for the season and this was the only game apart from the Saints game that we probably truly dominated. In fact, we actually dominated more than the Saints game. We just couldn't put it on the scoreboard. But of course, as they say, bad kicking is bad football. So in 2026 in round 2, we now get a chance to redeem ourselves against the Kangaroos with a game at Optus Stadium as Fremantle taking the Hands Oval Bunbury game this year against North. So off the back of round 1, North Melbourne looked really good against, obviously, Port Adelaide. I think they came out 46-point winners in the end, whereas, of course, as we know, West Coast had a game that was a tale of two halves against the premiership favourite Gold Coast up at Carrara. You know, we had a pretty poor first half where Gold Coast were just able to get a run on and just score pretty much at will, goals-wise, whereas we just struggled to even get our hands on the ball, and they, at one point, it was 2-12 before we basically wrested back momentum and control towards the end of the second quarter. And then, of course, as we know, we ended up winning the second half by a few points, which is a really good sign that the players didn't lower their heads like they have in previous years and ran the game out and put in maximum effort, which was a good sign to see. So hopefully they can carry that form into the game against North Melbourne. So basically, stylistically, the two sides are playing fairly different. So of course, as we know, Mini's been touted as bringing across this chaos style game ball from Richmond. I personally don't buy into the same sort of belief system that it's exactly the same as the Richmond style of play under Damien Hardwick. I think it's a bit of lazy journalism to just say we want to play like Richmond, because clearly we want elements of our game to be along the lines of what made Richmond successful, just like you would any premiership team, but you also can't just play one style all the time either, which we probably saw a bit of against Gold Coast in the second half, whereas when we're able to go direct, we would, but we wouldn't always do that. Would sometimes look to have a bit more of a control kick mark game style as well to slow the tempo of the game down and not just turn it into absolute bedlam all the time, because when you're already losing from that style, probably don't want to keep doing it, which is just going to let a team that's already scoring heavily against you continue to do so. It is interesting to note that clearly we do want to carry the ball a bit more in hand and run it through to break lines. West Coast had 11 running bounces against Gold Coast. Gold Coast had 15, and as we saw, they had a lot of forward handballs, which West Coast attempted to do as well, but a lot of the handballs were probably sideways and backwards for us to escape congestion, whereas Gold Coast were able just to nail forward handballs because, let's face it, they have a clearly better side than we do who's able to execute that game plan properly. I reckon about 5 of those running handballs was Willem Duursma on the wing in a space of about 10 metres, but still, it did show a willingness for us to run and carry. Now, watching the North Melbourne game, they're quite different. So they had a total of 5 running bounces for the match. Interestingly, Port only had 1. So both teams looked to maintain control of the ball. North Melbourne clearly did it better in that game as they ran out very comfortable winners. And an interesting stat that I have noticed for North Melbourne is that they're actually the only team with negative meters gained by handball, something to the tune of about 38 off the top of my head. I don't have the stat in front of me right now, but when I looked at that stat and then went back and watched their game, it's quite clear that they seem to like to use handballs to clear from congestion. So they go sideways and backwards a lot. They seem to have a sweeper at the back of stoppage, who then they use that person as a release, and that person immediately seems to look sideways or backwards to get a clear and kick out to another player to control possession. So then they'll just sort of chip the ball around until they get a player free, and then they'll kick long either to a player on the lead or a player that's basically it's a mismatch between them and their opponent. And they seem to kick long to that person, and when they get that entry, then they go fast with kicking again. So it's quite interesting to watch. It seems to take a lot to set up. It obviously worked really well against Port Adelaide. And we'll see how well it works against West Coast on Sunday. But it is interesting to note this is very different from the style that most other teams are looking to play. Most other teams are looking to play that forward handball meters gain style, as you can tell. And most of the top teams, even Essendon down the bottom, because we all know that their defensive woes are bad, but they like to run on run on attack. Most teams are looking to execute forward handballs and meters gained by handballs to transition the ball that way to break lines and create openness and space in the forward line. So basically, North Melbourne, you can probably expect to see them play a bit more control style kick mark like we did under Simo. And of course, where did Simo learn from? Alistair Clarkson. So it's a bit of a hallmark of his style of game plan. Is it outdated? It could be. But North Melbourne were very efficient by foot in this game. So if they can execute that style of game plan because they've got users of the football, it'll do them well pretty much for the rest of the year possibly. Of course, it's a very small sample size. It's only round one, but it was very effective against Port Adelaide, whereas we know that in the pre-season when we tried to play the forward handballing game against them, we're often pushed wide and tried to control, and then we're just beaten as soon as we turn the ball over. The ball just zoomed past us back the other way. And the same thing happened in the first half against the Gold Coast. So expect control, slower entries inside 50. They do seem to take a lot of contested marks and kick long to packs in the forward 50. Obviously, Larkey's, as their full forward, is a very tall marking target for them. And he took quite a few sort of clunks and contested grabs around there, as did Zerha. Paul Curtis as well is quite strong in the contest. So 1v1, these players are very strong. They're certainly comfortable kicking 1v1 to those players and expecting them to win their contest. At least they were against Port. So with that in mind, we'll just move on to the team changes for this game. So as mentioned in my video on Monday, if you watched my predicted changes, I had Liam Baker and Edwards coming in, and Tom Cole and probably Josh Lindsay going out. Now, it looks like we've opted with an extended bench. So we've added Liam Baker, Harry Edwards, Tim Kelly, and Harry Schoenberg, with Tom Cole the only official omission so far. And obviously, we can probably still expect one more, because I do expect Liam Baker and Harry Edwards to come into the team, which leads Harry Schoenberg and Tim Kelly potentially missing round 2 again. But we'll know that once the official teams come out over the weekend. As for North, no omissions yet. They've included Callum Coleman-Jones, who's a ruck forward, of course, or second ruck as well. Zach Banch and Robert Hansen Jr. as forward. So getting into some key matchups. Of course, probably the most important one, and one I absolutely can't see us winning, is Matt Flynn versus Tristan Sherry. Tristan Sherry is probably second best ruck in the game right now, or there's an argument for him to be second best behind Max Gorlin and in front of Darcy Cameron. Matt Flynn is nowhere near that. I think last year of all rated rucks in the game, he was 22, and there's only 18 teams, so he was very far behind. But he does probably suit the style of ruck that Tristan Sherry does, which is sort of more raw strength, old man energy, sort of wrestling for control and all that sort of stuff. So I don't expect him to win the battle, but at the very least, Tristan Sherry isn't a high-leaping ruckman, unlike Byzantini was last week for Port. And Tristan Sherry actually lost a lot of these centre hit-outs last week, and just hit-outs in general around the ground. Of course, he did grab it a lot out of the ruck, which doesn't count, but he was unable to use his side in the centre bounce with the new ruck rules. But, of course, around the ground with that stoppage, he totally bullied Vicentini. So can Matt Flynn hold his own size-wise? At the very least, we don't lose anything with a high-leaping ruckman in the middle. It'll just be two tanks going at each other. I expect the way the actual midfield is set up will determine how successful we are in centre bounce downs. So another one on paper, I'm not sure I expect them to line up this way, but Job Shanahan v Caleb Daniel. Now, Caleb Daniel actually has been playing as a release outlet and a designated kicker off halfback, and he has been doing that pretty much the whole time under Alistair Clarkson. Now, if this matchup does eventuate, I really hope West Coast do what they can to isolate it, because there is no way Caleb Daniel will be able to go with Job Shanahan just on height alone. It'll basically be looking, like an Oz kicker playing an under-15s kid if it does eventuate that way. And another one in the forward line, Jake Waterman on Griffin Logue. Griffin Logue doesn't have the pace that other backmen have, so he struggles really to close ground. So if Jake Waterman can get on leads, he'll probably beat Griffin Logue. Having said that, I do expect Toby Pink to go to Job Shanahan, not Caleb Daniel, and I think it looks that way on paper, but we'll see how we go when the game starts. Another one, of course, Tyler Young on Nick Larkey. Larkey's an interesting one if you've ever watched him play very much. He does like the ball over the back a lot, or kicked on his head. He is very tall. He is taller than Tyler Young, and he is quite strong in a 1v1. And watching Port last week, I noticed a lot of forward entries of 1v1 contests expecting their forwards to win. They are strong. Nick Larkey's always been good on the lead, and he always has a huge height and reach advantage over a lot of other backmen who generally sort of need a run-up to launch at the footy to knock it away and clear it from him. That should be an interesting one. Paul Curtis is probably the other one that might be interesting. He is very strong in the upper body, so he can push off his opponents quite a lot. He does have a big leap on him as well. He's took a spectacular mark, I think, in the first quarter against Port Adelaide. If you haven't seen it, make sure you go check it out. It's quite a good mark. I'm not sure Liam Baker is the player to go on him, so I'm probably thinking Liam Baker might move more towards Lockie Dobberson, and Ruben Jimby is probably more likely to take on Paul Curtis. Strength for strength, obviously Ruben's a very genetically gifted young man, and he's a lot bigger than Paul Curtis as well. So I would much prefer to see that matchup if that does eventuate in the backline. And, Ruben would probably want to see across a bit more halfback doing rebounding as well. He's probably one of our better running players off halfback to rebound the footy. Duggan gets a lot of the ball, but a lot of hat kicks, and he does turn it over a bit. So I'd like to see Ruben Jimby probably take that one-on-one matchup, presuming they don't line up as on paper. And lastly, of course, the two number 9s, Harley Reid v Luke Davies-Uniacke. Luke Davies-Uniacke, it's obviously an older player. He's really good in the contest. He has pace to burn, but he has a really good sidestep. So he's really smooth in traffic. He sidesteps most players, so you've got to be careful and watch out for him. So does Harley Reid, of course. So that should be a good matchup if they do end up going head-to-head. And even, I do expect LDU to get the chockies on that one. He's a much more experienced player than Harley, but he would be a good player to run with for him to see his, how hard he runs. He does get behind the ball a lot to repel attacks and be a release and outlet sort of kick or handball to other players. But he's also really good at running with the ball and taking players on as well. So it should be an exciting matchup if that eventuates. We'll see, but as we know, players rarely line up as they do on paper, so we can just sort of go off what we've been given by the team so far. So what do we want to see as Eagles fans? Well, of course, we want to see a bit more of an evolution of Qualls' game plan. Obviously, in the preseason, we saw a fair bit of it, probably in the first half versus Fremantle. Yeah, we missed that against Port Adelaide, where they kind of just ran straight over the top of us through us most of the time. So we were forced out wide to the flanks a lot and kicking to the boundary, which we probably don't really want to see all that much when we're trying to implement a game plan that is following what most of the better teams in the competition do, which is getting possession, forward handballing, hitting the ball forward and trying to move as fast on transition as turnover as possible. So we want to see a bit more of a focus on that and less letting North Melbourne just control the pace of the game. Against Port Adelaide, they really just sort of hung around. Port Adelaide tried this a bit themselves as well, but ultimately turned the ball over a couple of times. But a couple of times it also resulted in shots and goal. But North were a lot better at picking apart the Port Adelaide defence just through short kicking and ball retention. They had nearly 400 possessions as well, North Melbourne, which is quite a lot. So it shows they really wanted to possess the ball and just keep control of it and just not turn it over at all. But what I did note that when they did turn over, they were a bit slow to transition to a defensive structure. Obviously, like us and most bottom teams will struggle with defense on turnover and spread. So if we can switch on and force a contest and force a turnover, I think West Coast can transition the ball really quickly via, running through the zone and forward handballing, which seems to be something North Melbourne themselves don't play that way, and they definitely got opened up a few times when Port were able to do that. If West Coast can do that, we can expect to see more faster ball movement, of course, cleaner entries inside 50. And all we really wanted to see is a four-quarter effort and a fast start, or at least not a slow start, because there's nothing worse than watching games, and obviously Gold Coast game, as pleasing as it was to see the response after half-time, it's pretty annoying watching a dead game, because we're never going to come back from that. So, yes, we had a really good show in the second half, but the game was already done and dusted in the first quarter and a half. So, realistically, we'd probably be happier if we have more of a repeat of what we did versus Fremantle in the preseason and start fast and fade away, because you expect younger players to fade away. You don't expect them to start slow and lethargic. But of course, how much of that was to do with us having our first game for the year and Gold Coast having already played against the grand finalists in Geelong at home the week before with their second home game in a row, while we're travelling halfway across the entire country to face the best team in the competition. So mitigating circumstances, but of course we did see a lot of this last year where West Coast were very slow to start the game, and the game was over before we even turned it on. But we did see the opposite a few times against top teams, so we did see us play really well early against the likes of Geelong, Adelaide and Collingwood, and then fall away late. If we are to fall away late and lose this game against North Melbourne, I hope it's that way and not letting them just take the game away from us as early as possible, and then them dropping back into second gear and cruise control while we fight to get a respectable margin, because that's not ever putting ourselves in the game in a position to compete and win to begin with, which goes against everything Minnie McQualls has been saying, the whole time during his tenure. So as for that, who do I think will win? Look, as much as I want to tip West Coast to win, they've shown nothing to say that they deserve to be going into any game as favourites. So I'll say heart says 12 points winners to West Coast, but honestly my head says 23-point winners to North Melbourne. It really just depends on how we match up. Is this a false dawn for North Melbourne? They flogged Melbourne Demons early on last year as well, and then obviously had the year that they had. So they will be looking to, again, circle this game as a game that essentially they must win. We would obviously have it ticked off as a game that we think we can also win. But I feel Alistair Clarkson will definitely be drilling into his troops to not be complacent. Enjoy the win against Port, but don't overestimate yourself. Don't think West Coast only a one-win team are going to get it done, because they're on a similar level to us in regards to win-losses over the past 5 years. So, no game either team should be expected to win from any position on the ladder anyway, because we've historically had really close games against North, especially in Perth. They have a lot of support in WA, so expect a pretty good showing and turnout from their fans. As much as I think logically that North Melbourne will probably win by 2 to 3 goals, I do have a lot of hope and excitement and, enthusiasm for this game, that I think this is a really good opportunity for us to get a win early on in the season, really see what we're about. But if that doesn't eventuate, that's fine, provided we're seeing growth and development from the young guys, a further evolution and exposure to McQualls' game plan, and we're not just sinking into a style where we just play safe, chip around the boundary, trying to stem bleeding early on in the game. So as long as we can get off to a fast start, stay in the game as long as possible, fingers crossed, hopefully win, that would be amazing. But if we don't win, as long as we fight it out for 4 quarters as much as we can, I'll be satisfied. Anyway, what do you think? Do you think we are a chance of winning? I've got a poll running at the moment. I'll drop a link down in the description for you to vote on. If you think the West Coast Eagles can win this game against North Melbourne. Otherwise, once the game's done and dusted, I'll be leaving a review video on Monday morning at some point for you to check out my thoughts of the game. It might come out after the game, depending on how I feel about it. We'll see. But until then, I look forward to seeing you in the next one. And if you haven't already, please leave a like and consider subscribing to the channel. It really helps me out. Otherwise, go the Eagles. Bye for now.